How I ended my professor's career.
Last semester, I enrolled in an introductory French course at my university. This was to learn at least a little bit of French so that I could read French papers about French filmmaking techniques, since I'm a pretty hardcore film student and I really love film as an art form. Plus, I needed some gen ed credit for my degree, so it made sense to take the course. I went to the first lecture kind of dreading the course. I was in 19 credit hours, which is taking 6 classes in a single semester, and the class was 4 credit hours, meaning we met 4 days out of the week, every week. Very overwhelming schedule indeed. Needless to say, I didn't work a single job that semester. The professor, who will be referred to as Baguette, because it's one of the few French words I actually know, began to go through the syllabus, and I watched as the excitement that is usually present in students on the first day slowly left everyone's faces. Before I explain why, I have to address that this is the most basic French class that the university I go to offers, and is really meant for people who never took a lick of French in high school, like me. Baguette announced that not only would he be teaching the entire class in fluent French with no English whatsoever, he wouldn't be answering questions in English at all. And if you asked him a question in French but got even a word or a conjugation wrong, he wouldn't answer you either. Attendance was mandatory as well, and you could only miss 4 class periods before he started dropping letter grades. Now, this attendance policy is unfair bullshit because we met for class just under 60 times that semester, meaning you would fail the course if you missed 8 class periods, which is only about 7% of the total course. I was looking around the class, and people looked like they couldn't drop this class fast enough. Then, he announced that not only would we not be using a physical book, we'd be using a free website online, a site called Français Interactif. Now, this got some excitement back in the air. Textbook prices suck, and anything to lower the cost of education for students is great. You can even use the site yourself to practice your French skills if you want. It's open source, knock yourself out. That said, the site isn't meant to replace a textbook. There's a free workbook and audio files to help with oral comprehension on it, and that helped me and some of the other students pass some of the exams. But the site's equivalent to the part of a textbook that actually teaches you the material is extremely lacking, sometimes only having a couple of paragraphs about a really important concept in the language. In short, it gives you a ton of ways to practice concepts but almost no ways to learn them in the first place. This would have been totally fine if Baguette would have explained things better in his lectures. But, as you'll recall, he gave them entirely in French, and in fast fluent French. So, picture this. You have to sit through 4 classes a week that you understand literally nothing of for an hour at a time, while the professor rambles on in a language that you don't understand but are desperately trying to learn. And on top of all that, you can't even ask him any questions in English because he won't answer you, and you can't ask him any questions in French either because you don't know how to do that properly yet. And you won't for 3/4 these of the semester, because the unit that covers question words and phrases was arbitrarily put a few weeks after midterms. And on top of all that, you can't even really do your homework or study for exams because you have no fucking idea what any of this nasally shit means. Naturally, we, as a class, slowly started to get more and more frustrated as time went on. A few of us decided to band together and be friends and study partners to weather the storm. I'll call the important ones to the story R and SS, was a foreign exchange student from Spain who spoke perfect Spanish and was taking the class to learn French for when she goes back to Europe. Now, we dug into what all other classes Baguette taught and found out that he taught Spanish too. Perfect. We found a loophole. We could ask S a question in English, and she could ask him in Spanish, since it wasn't asking him in English, and he could answer in Spanish, and she could translate that back to us in English. Now, you might be saying to yourself that this a fucking stupid and no self-respecting educator should teach in this broken, shitty, ass-backwards way. You're right. This worked for a bit, but he started answering S's Spanish questions in French to combat our little exploit of the rules. We were defeated and back to square one. We needed to devise a new plan because most of us were failing at this point, and we were stressed beyond belief. R, a frat lad, and I, decidedly not a frat lad, became unlikely friends. He was a pretty naive kid, and he was a hardcore drinker. It visibly took a toll on him. He had a beer gut at 22, and addiction kind of mentally hollowed him out and made him flippant and emotional. The guy was super easy to piss off, and he overreacted to everything. I felt bad for the guy, and even outside of the struggle in class, I tried my best to be there for him. We were talking one day, and we decided to meet up at the library and just theorize ways to crack the class to get at least a 60. At the library, R was playing around on Français Interactif, trying to find the videos the professor would use for the oral part of the exam. Basically, you'd listen to the video and copy down whatever the person was saying for credit. Problem was, it was hard as shit, and it was easily the part of the exams that took the biggest chunk out of the class's grade. He couldn't find them on the site anywhere, and he got frustrated and gave up. So he started filling in the slots where you put answers on the homework pages of Français Interactif with random words. That's when we realized that when you do this, the site gives you the right answer regardless, no matter how wrong you are. Essentially, we now had access to the entire course's answers for the homework section, and all we had to do was put one character into the answer boxes. And since all we had to do for the homework assignments was copy and paste our answers into a Word document and submit them online, we could theoretically do all the homework while knowing zero material whatsoever if we just changed the answers in Word. We sat for about 45 minutes and did the rest of the homework for the entire course this way in one sitting. We agreed to not turn it all in at once so we couldn't get caught, and we agreed to keep our mouths shut and only share this with people who wouldn't rat on us. Obviously, we told S. One of the things I'll never forget about that first French class was that during the final, one of the students started to quietly weep. Then the weeping got louder, then louder still. The student was clutching his head in his hands, and you could feel the palpable impotent frustration at his inability to do French correctly. After I finished the final, I saw him outside the class staring out a window in the hall. I asked if he was all right and what he was crying about, and he told me he couldn't answer even the most basic questions, asking for words for things like left and right and up and down, and that was thing that finally broke him. That got to me, man. Most of the kids failed the course, even some of the ones who used the homework exploit. R and S passed with a D, and I passed with a C, surprisingly. The professor actually liked me for some reason, and graded my exams a bit more fairly. Even still, I'm an AB student, one in the honors program at my university, so a C kind of stung my GPA. But seeing as more than half the class failed, I counted my lucky stars that I got off easy. I went to enroll in my classes for the next semester, and I had completely forgot that I still had to take another French class for my degree. I checked the class list, and the second class you're supposed to take in the progression was only taught by Baguette. No other professor taught beginning French too, apparently. This struck me as kind of odd, so I checked the rest of the French classes that were available. All of them, all 6 courses in the French department, were taught by Baguette. He was the only fucking teacher the department had. My stomach dropped as I realized I had locked myself into yet another class taught by the worst professor I've ever had to this day. This is class where the revenge begins, and I'm sorry if that preamble was too long, but I had to give context as to how horrible Baguette was. Even still, I'm frankly not doing him justice. His class was an artful train wreck of incompetence, in the slowest slow motion available over nearly 60 class periods. And I had to do it again, only this time with harder material. I had been keeping up with R and S over the winter break, and S was going back to Spain, so she wouldn't be in the next class with me. But I got R to enroll in the same section of Beginning French 2 as me. Baguette passed out the syllabus to Beginning French 2, and it was the exact same as French 1, down to us using Français Interactif again, just in the higher chapters, instead of the basic chapters. Now, here's the thing about learning a foreign language. You have to build from the basics, or else none of the other stuff makes sense. None of us in that class, not one person, knew any of the material past maybe chapter 3. Most of us didn't even know how to ask questions. I did, so I asked questions for people who didn't, since S wasn't there. Well, if you thought we bumbled through the basic material, no harder bumbling took place than when we started on things that have no direct English translation like Y and EN. When he asked students questions in this class, they'd just kind of look at him dumbfounded and shrug. We got a study guide for our first exam, and I was going to study my ass off so that I could get a better grade than a C. Besides a brief stint with depression, my first semester that made me not be able to go to classes and fail one of my courses. A C was the lowest grade I had gotten at university. I must have studied for 20 hours over the course of a week before the exam. I hadn't even put that much effort into classes for my major. I got into class on the day of the exam, and nothing that I had spent all that time studying was on it. I bombed that test spectacularly, getting a 30%. At this point, I was pretty much done. I was willing to go to my professor's office hours and ask him how I was supposed to study for his exams effectively. And his response is what began my quest to get revenge on him. He told me to watch YouTube videos. I don't know what it was about this that got me so pissed, but I was fired up.
But that wasn't all that drove me to take the revenge I took on this fucker. No. What drove me to go after this guy was R calling me up crying after getting his exam back. He did worse than I did. He got a 15%. He kept repeating through sobs that he just wanted to be a good student and that he didn't want to disappoint his mom again. I'm not ashamed to admit that I cried at this. I thought back to that kid in French after the final, about my peers and about R, and something inside me snapped. I was going to get this guy fired and peacefully do anything else I could to ruin this guy's life one way or another. And R was going to be my right-hand man. We met at his dorm and started brainstorming. It was about halfway through the semester, after our midterms. We both had a job, a significant other, extracurricular activities, and I was taking 19 hours again this semester. We were going to need time on our side, a commodity that neither of us had, and we were going to need it quickly. We knew that the professor was going to be gone for a week at a conference right after spring break, so there was a 2-week window there. But even still, we needed more time for what we started planning to do. I faked a doctor's note for 2 weeks' absence, and R agreed to use all 4 of his absences to meet at the same time French was supposed to occur and plan our peaceful academic coup. Now, I knew I was eventually going to get caught from word go, but I was so confident that I could get this guy fired before I would have a disciplinary hearing that I took the gamble and Baguette took the bait. He excused me for 2 whole weeks. So, you're probably wondering what we actually did. Well, the reason we needed so much time is that we needed time to both conduct interviews from the class as well as collect data on scores. We got a total of 13 out of the 17 students to make a statement about Baguette's performance in his beginning French 2 class, and all of them were negative. This was just in one section of the course. Then we asked if we could have their exam scores so that we could have some hard data to nail this guy with. All but 2 complied. We did some quick maths and determined that more than half the class failed the exams, with most scoring between 30 and 50. But as it turns out, we didn't even need the exam scores given to us. We figured out that the online grade database site that our school uses, so students can monitor their grades without asking their profs, has a built-in feature that shows the class average of every assignment that's put into the gradebook. Not a single assignment had a class average above a 50 except for the homework, which had a class average of around 80. No doubt thanks to the stupid exploit in the website.
Sure enough, I got tagged with a notice that I broke the discipline code of the university, because obvious shop is obvious. But it didn't matter. I had everything I needed to go to the foreign language department chair and sort this shit out. So I did. I showed the department chair all the data, let him listen to the audio from the student testimonies, as well as gave my own testimony on the course. After showing him all this, he was dumbfounded. Not only did the chair not know that Baguette was a shitty teacher, almost nobody did course evaluations for French 1, so he thought that Baguette was doing a decent job. He took all my evidence and gave it to the Dean of Arts and Sciences, and a couple weeks later, I get an email saying that Baguette was back gone, and that I was going to be withdrawn from the course, along with everyone else who would have likely failed. Those who would have passed got to get a credit received grade without having to take the final. He got fired 1 semester before he qualified for his tenure. But that's not the juiciest fucking morsel of this tale. You're probably wondering how he got deported and how I found out that he got deported because of his firing. Well, after my disciplinary hearing got thrown out because the complainant was no longer affiliated with the university, I got more than I bargained for. During his lectures, one of the few times he spoke English was after he introduced the syllabus on the first day. He had everyone introduce themselves, and he started the exercise by introducing himself. Well, in his introduction, I remember him saying something about him being an immigrant from Venezuela. I live in the States. États-Unis for you bonjour bois. And some of you might know that we have pretty strict visa policies. Well, R is pretty conservative. After our work got Baguette fired, we celebrated by getting some beer and shooting the shit. We talked about random aspects of the course. And the fact that he was an immigrant got brought up. Apparently, R didn't know this and he was pretty upset about it. I tried to calm him down, but he went on a rant that I tried to politely nod along to, while tuning out since I'm not really about that. I didn't think anything of it until a couple of days later. He called me up and told me that he tipped Baguette off to a certain immigration agency for a visa check, his words, not mine, and that now all we had to do was wait. I was shocked. I didn't think this would go this far. I feigned that I was pleased with this, but in reality, I was kinda bummed. Since he was probably here on an academic visa since he was a professor, he probably is going back home to Venezuela. I am glad, though, that he won't be teaching any more of my fellow students at my uni because I wouldn't wish his classes on anyone.